The cantina on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual mix of traders, smugglers, and spacers looking for their next job. Blue smoke drifted through the air, mixing with the smell of cheap alcohol and alien spices. Jake Morrison sat in a corner booth, nursing his drink and trying to forget about his empty cargo hold and dwindling credits. Across from him, Chloe Barnes leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes held that haunted look common to people who had seen too much of the galaxy's darker side. "I'm telling you, Jake, it's real," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "The ghost of Soul. My cousin Danny saw it with his own eyes." Jake rolled his eyes and took another sip of his drink. "Come on, Chloe. You're talking about ghost stories. Spacer legends to scare rookies. This isn't some story told to wide-eyed cadets," Chloe snapped, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. "Danny was there during the Titan massacre. You remember that, right? 3 years ago, whole mining colony wiped out by Zephyrian raiders." Jake nodded. Everyone in this part of space knew about Titan. The colony had been defenseless, just miners and their families trying to make a living on a dead rock. When the Zephyrians came, there was nothing anyone could do to stop them, or so everyone thought. Danny was running supplies to the outer rim when it happened. Chloe continued. He saw the raider ships moving in, maybe 40 of them. Big ones, too, not just patrol boats. He figured the colony was done for, but he couldn't just leave those people to die. She paused to take a drink, her hands shaking slightly. Jake had known Chloe for 5 years, and he had never seen her this rattled. So Danny drops out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, ready to pick up any survivors he can find. But when he gets there, the Zephyrian ships are gone. All of them. Nothing but scrap metal floating in space. "Maybe the colony had better defenses than anyone knew," Jake suggested, but even he didn't sound convinced. Chloe shook her head. That's what Danny thought too, until he talked to survivors. They all told the same story. This massive ship just appeared out of nowhere, bigger than anything they'd ever seen, bigger than anything anyone has ever built. Jake leaned back in his seat. "How big are we talking?" Danny said the colonists described it as a floating city. 15 kilometers long, maybe more, covered in weapon ports that glowed like stars. It just sat there for maybe 10 seconds, and then it opened fire. The cantina noise seemed to fade as Chloe spoke. Other conversations continued around them, but Jake found himself hanging on every word. The colonists said it was like watching a god of war wake up. The Zephyrian ships tried to run, but it was too late. Whatever weapons that thing was carrying, they cut through the raider fleet like it was made of paper. 40 ships reduced to atoms in less than 5 minutes. And then what happened? Jake asked, despite himself. Then it vanished, just like that. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. No trace, no signature, nothing. Like it had never existed at all. Jake sat in silence for a long moment, processing what he'd heard. Stories like this had been circulating for years, but they were always vague, always secondhand. Someone knew someone who had seen something impossible. But Chloe's story felt different, more real. "You really believe this?" he asked finally. "I believe Danny," Chloe replied. "And he's not the only one. There are other stories, Jake. Dozens of them. Human colonies under attack, outnumbered, outgunned, ready to die. And then this ghost ship appears and wipes out the attackers. Across the galaxy, War Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying intelligence reports with growing irritation. The Zephyrian Collective had been expanding into human space for decades, taking colonies and resources with minimal resistance. Humans were supposed to be weak, divided, easy prey. But lately, things had been different. Entire raiding fleets had simply vanished. Colonies that should have fallen remained untouched. His subordinates whispered about cursed space and phantom ships, but Vextar had no patience for superstition. "Admiral," his intelligence officer said nervously, approaching with another data pad. "We've received reports from the Vortex sector. Fleet Commander Zaktar's squadron has gone silent. 43 ships, sir." Vextar's reptilian features twisted into a frown. "Equipment failure?" Navigational error. Unknown, sir. The last transmission was from a routine patrol near the human mining world of Ceres Prime. They reported everything normal, then nothing. The Admiral took the datapad and scrolled through the sparse information. Another disappeared fleet. Another mystery. His officers were starting to look at him with doubt in their eyes, wondering if their great leader was losing control of the situation. Double the patrol schedules. Vextar ordered. And I want sensor readings from every ship, every hour. If there's something out there picking off our fleets, we'll find it and destroy it. Back on Kepler Station, Jake was finishing his drink when his communicator buzzed. The message was brief but urgent. A distress signal from the human colony of New Denver. Pirates or raiders, requesting immediate assistance. I have to go, Jake said. Standing up, Chloe grabbed his arm. Jake, don't. That sector has been bad luck lately. Ships that go there don't come back. It's a colony ship full of families, Chloe. I can't just ignore it. Then at least be careful. If the stories are true, if there really is some kind of guardian angel watching over human space, maybe you'll get lucky. But if they're not... Jake patted her hand reassuringly. I'll be fine. Just a quick rescue run, in and out. As he walked toward the docking bay, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into something much bigger than a simple rescue mission. The stories Chloe had told him echoed in his mind, mixing with his own memories of the strange reports that had been circulating through spacer bars and trading posts. Maybe it was all nonsense. Maybe there was no ghost ship, no mysterious protector watching over humanity's colonies. But as Jake powered up his ship and prepared to jump to hyperspace, he found himself hoping that if such a thing existed, it would be watching over New Denver when he arrived. The stars stretched into lines as his ship entered hyperspace, carrying him toward a destiny he couldn't imagine. War Admiral Vextar stood before the massive viewing screen on his flagship's bridge, watching his ships continue to arrive. The sight before him would have terrified any enemy. Over 200 Zephyrian warships arranged in perfect battle formation. Destroyers, cruisers, and massive dreadnoughts stretched as far as the eye could see, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. This was the largest fleet the Collective had ever assembled. Vextar had pulled ships from 12 different sectors, calling in favors and issuing direct orders to create this Armada. The human colony of New Denver would be its target, and its destruction would send a message across the galaxy that humanity's expansion was over. Admiral, his second-in-command, approached cautiously. All fleet elements have reported in. We are ready to begin the assault. Vextar nodded, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. New Denver wasn't just any colony. It was one of humanity's most successful agricultural worlds, feeding dozens of other settlements. More importantly, it was a symbol of human determination, a thriving world built from nothing in the face of constant danger. Begin the approach, Vextar ordered. I want every human in that system to see us coming. Let them count our ships in despair. On the surface of New Denver, Colonial Governor Lisa Campbell stood in the Emergency Command Center, watching the sensor displays with growing dread. The approaching Zephyrian fleet was beyond anything they had prepared for. Her world defenses consisted of 6 patrol boats and a handful of orbital platforms, hardly enough to stop a single enemy cruiser, let alone an entire armada. How long do we have? She asked the Chief of Security, Matt Rodriguez. Matt checked his datapad, his face grim. At current speed, they'll be in bombardment range in 6 hours. Maybe less. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the 1 million people living on New Denver. Farmers, teachers, children playing in the green fields under the colony's artificial sun, all of them depending on her to keep them safe. Begin the evacuation, she ordered. Civilian transports first. Get as many people off-world as possible. Ma'am, one of her officers spoke up hesitantly. Even if we use every transport we have, we can't evacuate everyone in 6 hours. Maybe a tenth of the population, if we're lucky. Lisa felt the weight of command crushing down on her shoulders. She had always known this day might come, but knowing and experiencing were 2 different things. In a few hours, her world would be burning, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Do what you can, she said quietly. Save who you can save. In space, The Zephyrian Armada moved with deadly precision. The smaller ships formed an outer perimeter while the heavy cruisers and dreadnoughts took position for the bombardment. It was a textbook assault formation, one that had conquered dozens of worlds. Vextar opened a communication channel to the planet below. Humans of New Denver. His voice boomed across all frequencies. I am War Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Collective. Your world is surrounded by the greatest fleet ever assembled. You have one chance for survival. Surrender unconditionally and submit to collective rule. On the planet's surface, Lisa Campbell stepped up to the communications console. Her voice was steady despite the fear in her heart. This is Governor Campbell of New Denver. We are a peaceful agricultural colony. We have done nothing to provoke this attack. Vextar's laughter was cold and cruel. You exist human. That is provocation enough. You have 1 hour to consider my offer. After that, we will demonstrate the price of defiance. The communication ended, leaving an eerie silence in the command center. Lisa looked around at her staff, seeing her own fear reflected in their faces. Outside, the evacuation ships were launching as fast as they could be loaded, but it wasn't nearly fast enough. At the edge of the system, Jake Morrison's ship dropped out of hyperspace. His navigator, Pete Johnson, immediately started scanning the area, his face going pale as the readings came in. Jake, Pete said, his voice barely above a whisper. You need to see this. Jake looked at the sensor display and felt his blood turn to ice. The Zephyrian fleet spread before them like a dark cancer against the stars. Hundreds of ships, each one capable of destroying his small merchant vessel with a single shot. How many? Jake asked. Over 200 confirmed contacts, Pete replied, running the scan again as if he couldn't believe the numbers. This isn't a raid, Jake. This is an invasion force. Jake stared at the display, thinking about the families on New Denver, children who would never grow up, dreams that would never be fulfilled. His small ship could maybe rescue 50 people if he packed them in tight, but what good was 50 against 1,000,000? Set course for the planet, he ordered. Jake, that's suicide, Pete protested. We can't fight that fleet. Hell, we can't even outrun it. I'm not planning to fight them, Jake said, his jaw set with determination. But I'm not running either. Maybe we can't save everyone, but we can save someone. As Jake's ship moved deeper into the system, something strange happened. For just a moment, his sensors detected something massive moving in the outer darkness. Something that shouldn't have been there. But when he looked again, the reading was gone. Did you see that? He asked Pete. See what? Pete was focused on plotting their approach to New Denver, try to find a route that would avoid the Zephyrian patrols. Jake shook his head. Maybe it was just sensor noise, or maybe his nerves were getting to him. But for a second, it had looked like there was another ship out there, a big one. On his flagship, Vextar watched the human evacuation efforts with amusement. A few dozen ships fleeing like frightened animals, carrying perhaps a few thousand refugees. It was pathetic, really. These humans had no concept of real power, no understanding of the forces arrayed against them. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're detecting several more human ships approaching the planet. Small vessels, probably merchants trying to help with the evacuation. Let them come, Vextar said dismissively. Let them watch as we demonstrate the futility of resistance. Perhaps some of them will survive to carry word of our victory to other human worlds. The hour deadline passed quickly. On New Denver's surface, Lisa Campbell stood with her remaining staff in the command center, watching as the last evacuation ships disappeared into hyperspace. They had managed to save maybe 50,000 people, a fraction of the colony's population. Governor, Matt Rodriguez said quietly, "It's time." Lisa nodded, then activated the planet-wide communication system. "Citizens of New Denver," she said, her voice carrying to every home and shelter on the planet. "This is your governor. I want you all to know that it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve this colony. You built something beautiful here, something worth defending. Whatever happens next, remember that." In space, Vextar gave the order his fleet had been waiting for. All ships, prepare for orbital bombardment. Target population centers first, then industrial facilities. Leave nothing standing. The massive guns of the Zephyrian dreadnoughts began to glow with deadly energy. In moments, the bombardment would begin, and New Denver would become another cautionary tale about the price of opposing the collective. But in the deep space beyond the outer planets, ancient sensors had been watching, analyzing, calculating, and now, after decades of patient waiting, those sensors sent a signal into the void. Far away, something immense began to stir. In the deepest black between star systems, where even the nearest sun was just another distant point of light, something vast began to wake up. The U.S. Leviathan had been drifting in the void for 37 years, its massive hull dark and silent, waiting for the moment when humanity would need it most. The ship was enormous beyond belief. 15 kilometers of armored hull bristling with weapons that most people couldn't even imagine. It had been built in secret during humanity's darkest hour, when Earth's colonies were first being attacked by alien raiders. The project had consumed the resources of entire worlds and the lives of thousands of engineers and scientists. Deep inside the Leviathan's command center, Captain Helen Carter felt a familiar tingle of the revival process as her cryogenic pod began to warm. Around her, 500 other pods were doing the same thing, bringing back to life the most elite crew humanity had ever assembled. Helen's eyes opened slowly, her mind still foggy from decades of sleep. The first thing she saw was the glowing face of Darwin, the ship's artificial intelligence. "Welcome back, Captain," Darwin said in its calm, measured voice. "I apologize for waking you, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Helen sat up carefully, her body protesting after so many years in suspension. "How long, Darwin?" 37 years, for months, 16 days, the AI replied. Earth and the colonies had continued to expand, but they now faced their greatest threat yet. A Zephyrian armada of over 200 ships is preparing to destroy the colony of New Denver. Helen stood slowly, her training kicking in as the last of the sleep fog cleared from her mind. She had known this day would come eventually. The Leviathan had been designed for exactly this kind of situation, when humanity faced complete extinction and needed a miracle to survive. "Show me," she ordered. The command center's main screen lit up with images from the New Denver system. Helen watched the massive Zephyrian fleet taking position around the human colony, their weapons charging for bombardment. It was exactly the kind of overwhelming force that the Leviathan had been created to face. "Analysis, Darwin," Helen said as she moved to her command chair. Around the bridge, her senior officers were beginning to wake up and take their positions. "The Zephyrian Collective has assembled their largest fleet ever," Darwin reported. 14 dreadnoughts, 43 heavy cruisers, 97 destroyers, and numerous support vessels. Total firepower estimate, sufficient to reduce New Denver to molten slag within 30 minutes of bombardment. Helen's first officer, Commander Rick Stone, stumbled onto the bridge, still shaking off the effects of long sleep. "Captain," he said, saluting despite his obvious disorientation. "Are we finally going active?" "Looks like it, Rick," Helen replied. "Get everyone to their stations." "How long since our last full systems check?" "All primary systems were tested 18 months ago," Darwin answered. "Weapons, shields, and propulsion are at 100% efficiency. The ship is ready for combat, Captain." Helen looked at the tactical display again, studying the enemy formation. The Zephyrians had positioned themselves perfectly for a bombardment, but that same formation left them vulnerable to a surprise attack. They clearly weren't expecting any real resistance. "Darwin, how long to reach the New Denver system at maximum speed?" 14 minutes, 37 seconds, Captain." Helen nodded. Around the bridge, her crew was taking their positions with the efficiency that had made them legends. These were the best of the best. Pilots who could thread a needle at light speed, gunners who could hit a target from impossible distances, engineers who could keep the ship running through anything. "Helm, set course for New Denver. Maximum stealth approach," Helen ordered. "I want us to arrive undetected." "Aye, Captain," the helmsman replied, his fingers dancing over his controls. Course laid in. "Darwin, bring all weapon systems online. Charge the main batteries and prepare firing solutions for the entire enemy fleet." The AI's response was immediate. Throughout the massive ship, Weapons that had slept for decades began to hum with deadly energy. Particle beam cannons the size of city blocks powered up, missile tubes loaded with warheads that could crack planets prepared to fire. The Leviathan was waking up, and it was hungry for battle. On New Denver, Governor Lisa Campbell watched helplessly as the Zephyrian ships moved into final bombardment position. The evacuation had saved some people, but over 900,000 colonists remained on the planet. In a few minutes, they would all be dead. "Any word from the outer colonies?" she asked Matt Rodriguez, though she already knew the answer. New Denver was too far from the major human worlds to expect help. They were on their own. "Nothing, Governor," Matt confirmed. "Even if Earth sent a fleet right now, they couldn't get here for weeks." Lisa nodded sadly. She had done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. Never enough. In space, Jake Morrison's small merchant ship dodged between the Zephyrian patrols, trying to reach the planet's surface. He had managed to rescue 37 people so far, loading them into every spare corner of his ship. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Jake." His navigator Pete called out urgently. "I'm picking up some kind of energy signature. Something big moving fast toward the system." Jake glanced at his sensors, but saw nothing except the Zephyrian fleet. "You sure about that?" "I'm not sure about anything anymore," Pete muttered. "But something's coming. Something that makes these Zephyrian ships look like toys." On the Zephyrian flagship, War Admiral Vextar prepared to give the final order. His weapons were charged, his fleet was in position, and the human colony lay defenseless before him. This would be his greatest victory, the moment that secured his place in history. "All ships," he announced across the fleet communication channel, "prepare to fire on my command. Today we show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the collective." But even as he spoke, something was happening in the deep space beyond the system's edge. Reality itself seemed to ripple as the UES Leviathan dropped out of its stealth approach, its massive hull suddenly appearing where moments before there had been nothing but empty void. The human dreadnought's arrival sent shockwaves through space itself. Ship sensors across the system suddenly screamed warnings as they detected the massive energy signature. On New Denver, every communication device picked up the same signal, the electronic roar of a awakening giant. Captain Helen Carter stood on her bridge, looking at the tactical display that showed the entire Zephyrian fleet spread out before them. After 37 years of waiting, the moment had finally come. "All stations report ready, Captain," Commander Stone announced. Helen smiled grimly. "Then let's show them why humanity has survived every attempt at extinction. All ships. This is Captain Helen Carter of the United Earthship Leviathan. You have 60 seconds to withdraw from this system before I demonstrate the true meaning of human warfare." The message broadcast on all frequencies, reaching every ship in the system. For a moment, there was absolute silence as both humans and aliens tried to process what they were seeing. Then War Admiral Vextar began to laugh. War Admiral Vextar's laughter echoed across his flagship's bridge as he stared at the massive human ship that had appeared from nowhere. Even he had to admit it was impressive, larger than any vessel he had ever seen. But one ship, no matter how big, could not stand against his entire armada. "Magnificent," he said to his officers. "The humans have finally shown us their secret weapon, and now we will destroy it and crush their hopes forever." He opened a communication channel to the human vessel. "Unknown human ship, this is War Admiral Vextar. Your vessel is impressive, but you are outnumbered 200 to 1. Surrender now, and I may allow your crew to live as slaves." Captain Helen Carter's response was immediate and cold. "Admiral, my name is Captain Helen Carter. I served in the Earth Defense Force for 23 years before taking command of this vessel. In that time, I've learned that sometimes the best way to handle bullies is to hit them so hard they never get back up." Vextar snarled, his reptilian features twisting with anger. "Then you will die with honor. Human, all ships, target the enemy vessel. Fire at will." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every weapon in the Zephyrian fleet opened fire at once. Energy beams that could melt asteroids, plasma torpedoes that could crack moons, and kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed all converged on a Leviathan in a display of firepower that should have vaporized any ship ever built. The barrage lit up space like a new star being born. The energy release was so intense that ships on both sides had to adjust their sensors to avoid being blinded. On New Denver, people looked up at the sky and saw what looked like the birth of a second sun. When the light faded, the Zephyrian officers expected to see nothing but glowing debris where the human ship had been. Instead, they saw the Leviathan floating exactly where it had been before, completely undamaged. Its shields hadn't even flickered. "Impossible," Vextar whispered, staring at his tactical display in disbelief. On the Leviathan's bridge, Captain Carter smiled grimly as she watched the enemy fleet's shocked reaction. "Darwin, damage report." "No damage, Captain," the AI responded calmly. "Enemy weapons were absorbed by our defensive grid with 97% efficiency. Shall I return fire?" "Not yet," Helen said, studying the tactical display. "Let them try again. I want to understand exactly how outclassed they are before we show them what real weapons look like." The Zephyrian fleet fired again, pouring even more energy into their attack. This time they focused their fire, concentrating every weapon on a single point of the Leviathan's hull. The result was the same. The human ship absorbed the attack, without even seeming to notice. Panic began to spread through the alien fleet. Ship captains who had conquered dozens of worlds suddenly found themselves facing something beyond their understanding. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was technology so far beyond their own that their weapons might as well have been throwing rocks. "Admiral," one of Vextar's officers said nervously, "perhaps we should consider withdrawal. This ship appears to be using some kind of technology we've never encountered." Vextar backhanded the officer, sending him sprawling across the deck. "We do not retreat. We are the Zephyrian Collective. We have conquered half the galaxy." But even as he spoke, Vextar could see the fear in his crew's eyes. The human ship sat there like a predator play with its prey, completely untouchable. For the first time in his military career, the War Admiral began to understand what real fear felt like. On the Leviathan, Captain Carter watched the enemy fleet's increasingly desperate attacks with cold satisfaction. She had waited 37 years for this moment, and it was everything she had hoped for. "Darwin, are you ready to show them what we can do?" "All weapon systems are online and ready, Captain. I have targeting solutions for the entire enemy fleet." Helen nodded, then opened a communication channel to all ships in the system. "This is Captain Carter to all vessels. What you are about to witness is why humanity has survived every attempt at our extinction. We do not start fights, but we always finish them." She turned to her weapons officer. "Commander Brooks, you may fire when ready." The Leviathan's first shot was almost gentle by the ship's standards, a single particle beam that lanced out across space to touch one of the Zephyrian destroyers. The enemy ship simply vanished, converted to its component atoms in a microsecond. The effect on the alien fleet was immediate and devastating. Ships that had been advancing suddenly reversed course, tried to put distance between themselves and the human monster. But space was vast, and there was nowhere to run. Helen's next command sent a chill through every alien heart in the fleet. All batteries, commence firing. Show them the price of threatening human worlds. What followed could barely be called a battle. It was more like watching a force of nature at work. The Leviathan's weapons reached out across impossible distances, each shot precisely targeted and absolutely devastating. Zephyrian ships died by the dozen, their advanced armor and shields useless against weapons that operated on principles their science couldn't even begin to understand. But this wasn't mindless slaughter. Captain Carter was surgical in her targeting, going after weapons platforms and command ships, while carefully avoiding support vessels and ships that were clearly trying to surrender. This was a lesson, not genocide. War Admiral Vextar watched his proud fleet being systematically destroyed and felt something break inside him. Ships that had taken years to build were being reduced to scrap metal in seconds. Crews he commanded for decades were dying, and there was nothing he could do to save them. "All ships," he finally broadcast, his voice cracking with defeat. "Retreat, full retreat. Get us out of here." But it was too late for many of them. The Leviathan's weapons reached across the light minutes between ships, striking with impossible accuracy. Gravity weapons crushed entire squadrons. Energy beams that existed in dimensions alien science had never discovered phased through conventional shields to detonate ships from within. Jake Morrison, watching from his small merchant ship, could barely believe what he was seeing. The ghost ship from Chloe's stories was real, and it was everything she had described and more. The Zephyrian Armada that had seemed unstoppable just minutes ago was being torn apart like paper dolls. "My God," Pete whispered beside him. "Where did that thing come from?" Jake shook his head, unable to find words. On his sensors, the massive human ship was still growing larger as its true size became apparent. 15 kilometers of death and destruction, wielding weapons that rewrote the rules of physics with each shot. In less than 10 minutes, it was over. Of the 200 ships that had come to destroy New Denver, fewer than 30 remained, and those were fleeing as fast as their engines could carry them. The space around the human colony was filled with the expanding debris clouds that had once been the pride of the Zephyrian Collective. Captain Carter stood on her bridge, watching the retreating enemy ships on her tactical display. The demonstration was complete. The galaxy had been reminded that humanity was not defenseless, had never been defenseless. "Darwin," she said quietly, "open a channel to all ships and all frequencies." "Channel open, Captain." Helen's voice carried across space, reaching every surviving ship in the system and beyond. "This is Captain Helen Carter of the United Earth ship Leviathan. Let the word go out across the galaxy. Humanity extends a protection to all peaceful species, but those who threaten our existence will discover that we are not the prey they believe us to be. We are the apex predators of this galaxy, and we have been watching." The message would reach every corner of known space within days, carried by the few Zephyrian survivors and broadcast by human communication networks. The age of humanity being seen as easy prey was over.